The morning fog rolled across Naval Amphibious Base Coronado like a gray blanket, thick enough to hide secrets and thin enough to reveal shadows. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had seen plenty of strange things during his 12 years as a Navy SEAL, but nothing quite like what happened that Tuesday morning in September. Jake was leading his team through their pre-dawn training routine when she appeared. One moment the beach was empty except for his six-man squad, and the next a woman stood silently at the edge of their training area. She wore no uniform, carried no identification, and displayed no rank insignia. Yet every instinct Jake had developed over years of combat operations told him this person was dangerous in ways he couldn't yet understand. What happened next defied everything Jake thought he knew about military protocol and chain of command. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, a tough-as-nails operator who had served 3 combat deployments and never backed down from anyone, immediately snapped to attention. Without hesitation, without question, without any apparent reason, Rodriguez rendered a perfect military salute to the unknown woman. The rest of the team followed suit in rapid succession. Chief Petty Officer Williams, who had been in the teams longer than anyone and respected exactly 3 people on the entire planet, saluted crisply. Petty Officer Jackson, known for his rebellious streak and tendency to question authority, saluted without a moment's pause. Even Petty Officer Thompson, fresh out of BUD/S and still learning the ropes, somehow knew to salute this mysterious figure. Jake found himself raising his own hand in salute before his conscious mind even processed the decision. The movement felt automatic, instinctual, as if his body recognized something his brain hadn't yet figured out. The woman acknowledged their salutes with a slight nod, her dark eyes scanning each face with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to their souls. She appeared to be in her early 30s, average height, with shoulder-length black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her appearance screamed military, yet she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Carry on with your training," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the beach despite the sound of crashing waves. The accent was hard to place, slight, but noticeable, suggesting origins far from California. The woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning mist as suddenly as she had appeared. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, but Jake knew it would stay with him for the rest of his life. As soon as she was out of sight, the questions began. "What the hell just happened?" Rodriguez asked, voicing what they were all thinking. "Why did we salute her?" Jackson added, looking genuinely confused by his own actions. Jake had no answers. In all his years of service, through multiple combat deployments and countless training exercises, he had never experienced anything like it. Military personnel didn't salute random civilians, period. Yet something about this woman had triggered an immediate and universal response of respect from his entire team. "I don't know," Jake admitted, still staring at the spot where the woman had vanished. "But I'm going to find out." The rest of their training session was a disaster. Nobody could focus, and Jake finally called it off early. As they headed back to base, Chief Williams fell in a step beside him. "Skipper," Williams said quietly, using the informal title that indicated a serious conversation was coming. "I've been doing this for 18 years. I've served with every type of operator you can imagine. Special Forces, Delta, SAS, you name it. I've never seen anyone who made me want to salute them just by standing there." Jake nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. "Any idea who she might be?" "None," Williams replied. "But whoever she is, she's not regular military. Regular military doesn't move like that." "Move like what?" Williams was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Like she owns the ground she walks on. Like she's seen things that would break most people and came out stronger for it. Like she's earned the right to be respected without having to demand it." Back at the base, Jake immediately began making inquiries. He started with the duty officer, then worked his way up the chain of command. Nobody had any record of a civilian visitor that morning. No meetings were scheduled, No inspections planned, no VIP tours authorized. The base security cameras had malfunctioned during the exact time period when a woman appeared, showing nothing but static between 0530 and 0600 hours. The malfunction was attributed to equipment failure, but Jake found the timing suspicious. He spent the next several hours making phone calls and sending emails to every contact he had in the intelligence community. Most came back negative, but a few responses were strange enough to raise more questions. A contact at the CIA returned his call with unusual instructions. Stop asking questions about this, Jake. Some stones are better left unturned. A friend at Naval Intelligence was even more direct. Whatever you think you saw this morning, forget about it. Trust me on this one. The more people told him to drop the matter, the more determined Jake became to get answers. That evening, he gathered his team at a bar off base for an unofficial debrief. They found a corner table where they could speak privately, and Jake laid out what little he had learned. So nobody knows anything, Rodriguez summarized after Jake finished his report. Or they're not talking. People know something, Jake corrected. They're just not willing to share it with us. Thompson, the newest member of the team, had been quietly nursing his beer while the others talked. Finally, he spoke up. My girlfriend works in personnel at SOCOM headquarters, he said hesitantly. Maybe she could run some searches, see if anything comes up. Jake nodded. Worth a try. But tell her to be careful. Something about this whole situation feels classified, way above our pay grade. Williams leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. I've been thinking about something else. Did anyone else notice how she looked at us? It wasn't just observing. It was evaluating, like she was measuring us for something. The table fell silent as they all recalled those intense dark eyes and the way they seemed to see everything. Evaluating us for what? Jackson asked. That's what worries me, Williams replied. 2 days later, Thompson's girlfriend provided the first real lead. She had found a reference in a classified database to something called the Phantom File Project. The details were heavily redacted, but the basic premise was disturbing. Individuals who existed in the military system without traditional documentation, operators so classified that their very existence was need to know. According to the file, these individuals were given special status that superseded normal military hierarchy. They could operate without oversight, requisition resources without authorization, and command respect for personnel regardless of rank or position. The file was dated 5 years earlier and marked as project discontinued. But Jake had the sinking feeling that whatever the Phantom File Project had been, it was far from over. 3 days after their encounter with the mystery woman, Jake's team was reassigned to a new training exercise. The orders came down from higher headquarters with unusual speed and specificity. Immediate deployment to a classified location for specialized counterterrorism training. Jake tried to get details about the exercise from his commanding officer, but was told simply to pack for a 2-week deployment and await further instructions. The lack of information was troubling, especially given the timing. As his team prepared to deploy, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with a mystery woman had set something in motion. He had seen enough covert operations to recognize the signs: sudden reassignments, classified orders, and a general atmosphere of things happening behind closed doors. The night before they were scheduled to leave, Jake was working late in his office when he heard a soft knock at his door. He looked up to find a mystery woman standing in his doorway. This time, she was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a black sweater, and boots that looked both practical and expensive. Her hair was down, softening her features slightly, but her eyes held the same intensity he remembered. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, she said, stepping into his office without invitation. We need to talk. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, but stopped when he realized the gesture was more reflexive than necessary. Something told him this woman wasn't here to hurt him, despite the fact that she had somehow bypassed base security and entered a restricted area without authorization. Who are you? Jake asked directly. The woman closed the door behind her and took a seat across from his desk without being invited. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said simply, and I'm here to offer you and your team an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Elena leaned back in her chair, studying Jake's face carefully. The kind that doesn't officially exist. The kind that saves lives and protects interests that most people never hear about. The kind that requires operators who can think beyond conventional parameters and act without the safety net of normal military support structures. Jake felt his pulse quicken. This was starting to sound like recruitment for something well outside normal special operations parameters. "And if we're not interested?" he asked. Elena smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Then you continue with your careers, serve with distinction, and retire knowing you made a difference in conventional ways. There's no shame in that path, Commander. Most operators never get the chance to choose anything else. But some operators are capable of more. Some can handle missions that require them to operate in gray areas where traditional military doctrine doesn't apply. Some can be trusted with responsibilities that would break others." Jake studied her face, trying to read the truth behind her words. "How do you know we're capable of more?" "Because I've been watching you and your team for months," Elena replied matter-of-factly. "Your performance in Iraq last year, the hostage rescue in Somalia, the way you handled the situation in Syria when everything went sideways and you had to improvise with no backup." Jake's blood ran cold. The Syria operation had been classified at the highest levels. Very few people outside his chain of command knew any details about what had happened there. "Who the hell are you really?" he demanded. Elena stood up smoothly, her movement fluid and controlled. "I'm someone who needs operators capable of doing what needs to be done, regardless of whether it appears in any official record. I'm someone who can offer you missions that matter in ways you can't imagine. And I'm someone who can give you the resources and authority to succeed where conventional military operations fail." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. "Your team ships out tomorrow for what you think is a training exercise. It's not. It's an evaluation. How you perform over the next 2 weeks will determine whether you're offered a chance to join something bigger than anything you've experienced in conventional special operations. And if we fail this evaluation..." Elena's expression became deadly serious. "Then you go back to your normal careers, and we never met." "But, Commander, I don't think you're going to fail. I think you and your team are exactly what we need." She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. "One more thing," she added without turning around. "When your team asked why they saluted me, they were asking the wrong question. The right question is why they recognized authority they didn't consciously understand." Elena disappeared into the darkened hallway, leaving Jake alone with more questions than answers and the growing certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. He spent the rest of the night staring at classified documents and trying to piece together what he had gotten himself and his team into. By morning, only one thing was clear: there was no backing out now. Whatever Elena Vasquez represented, whatever organization she worked for, they were already committed to a path that would lead them far from anything resembling normal military service. As Jake packed his gear for what he now knew wasn't a routine training exercise, he wondered if he was making the right choice. But deep down, he knew that Elena was right about one thing. His team was capable of more than conventional operations. The question was whether they were ready for what that really meant. The transport helicopter arrived before dawn, its rotors cutting through the morning air with mechanical precision. As Jake's team loaded their gear, he noticed details that confirmed his suspicions. The aircraft bore no military markings, the crew wore no identifying patches, and the flight manifest listed their destination simply as Training Site 7. As California disappeared beneath them, Jake realized they were heading towards something that would either make them into the operators Elena believed they could be, or destroy them in ways the military didn't have procedures to handle. The real test was about to begin. The helicopter touched down on a remote airstrip somewhere in the Nevada desert, far from any marked roads or visible civilization. Jake estimated they had flown for 3 hours, but the windows had been blacked out for the final hour, making it impossible to determine their exact location. As his team gathered their gear and stepped onto the tarmac, Jake noted several disturbing details. The airstrip was well maintained, but completely unmarked. No control tower, no visible personnel, no signs indicating what facility they had arrived at. Just a single black SUV waiting with its engine running. The driver was a man in his 40s wearing desert camouflage with no name tape or unit patches. He gestured for them to load their gear into the vehicle without speaking a word. The 20-minute drive took them through increasingly desolate terrain until they arrived at what looked like an abandoned mining facility. The compound consisted of several weathered buildings surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, but Jake couldn't see any personnel manning them. Everything about the place suggested it had been operational once, but had been mothballed years ago. Their silent driver led them to a barracks building that contained 6 cots, basic bathroom facilities, and nothing else. A note on the central table provided their only instructions: wait for further orders. Do not attempt to leave the compound. Food and water will be provided. Well, this is cozy, Rodriguez muttered, dropping his pack on one of the cots. Williams walked to the single window and peered out at the desert landscape. I count at least 4 observation points with clear lines of sight to this building, he reported quietly. We're being watched. Jake wasn't surprised. Every instinct told him this was an elaborate test, though he couldn't yet determine what they were being tested for. The isolation, the secrecy, the complete lack of normal military protocol. It all suggested they were being evaluated for something far outside conventional special operations parameters. They waited for 3 hours before Elena Vasquez appeared. She entered the barracks without knocking, dressed in military-style clothing, but still wearing no rank or unit insignia. This time, Jake noticed details he had missed during their previous encounters. The way she moved suggested extensive close-quarters combat training. Her eyes constantly scanned for threats and exits. Most telling, she wore her gear like someone accustomed to operating in hostile environments where failure meant death. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority Jake remembered. "Welcome to your evaluation." Thompson raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, what exactly are we being evaluated for?" Elena smiled slightly. "Honesty. That's a good start." She moved to the center of the room, positioning herself where she could see all 6 men clearly. "You're being evaluated for inclusion in a program that doesn't officially exist. If you succeed, you'll be offered positions that will require you to operate outside normal military channels. You'll have resources and authority that exceed your current rank and position, but you'll also face responsibilities that could get you killed or imprisoned if you handle them incorrectly." Jackson leaned forward on his cot. "And if we fail?" "You return to your normal duties with no record of this conversation or this location," Elena replied. "Your security clearances will be updated to exclude any mention of what you've experienced here, and you'll continue your careers as conventional special operations personnel." Jake studied her face, trying to read the truth behind her words. "What makes you think we're right for this program?" Elena's expression became more serious. "Because you've already demonstrated the qualities we need. Independent thinking under pressure. Ability to operate effectively when normal support systems fail. Willingness to make difficult decisions without higher authorization when lives are at stake." She began pacing slowly, her boots making soft sounds on the concrete floor. "Last year in Syria, your team was cut off from command and control for 18 hours. Instead of waiting for orders that might never come, you improvised a mission that saved 12 hostages and eliminated a terrorist cell that intelligence agencies had been tracking for months." Jake felt his team stirring uneasily. That operation was classified at levels that should have made it invisible to anyone outside a very small circle of personnel. 6 months ago in Somalia, Elena continued, your team was ordered to conduct reconnaissance only. When you discovered that hostages were being moved to a location where they would be executed, you violated your orders and conducted an immediate rescue operation. 14 civilians lived because you were willing to risk court-martial rather than follow rules that would have gotten people killed. Williams cleared his throat. How do you know about these operations? Because the organization I work for has been tracking operators like you across all branches of military special operations, Elena replied. We identify personnel who demonstrate the ability to think beyond conventional parameters and act effectively when normal military doctrine proves inadequate. Rodriguez stood up from his cot. What organization? Elena paused her pacing and looked directly at him. One that handles problems other agencies can't or won't deal with. One that operates in spaces between official military action and civilian law enforcement. One that requires operators capable of making decisions that would paralyze conventional command structures. Sounds like a fancy way of describing mercenary work, Jackson said bluntly. It's not, Elena replied without hesitation. Mercenaries work for money. We work for outcomes that serve national interests in ways that can't be acknowledged publicly. Every mission we conduct is authorized at the highest levels of government, but none of them will ever appear in official records. Jake felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fit together. The Phantom File Project. Elena's eyes sharpened. You've been doing research. My team doesn't like mysteries, Jake replied. We found references to a program that created operators without traditional documentation. Individuals with special status that superseded normal military hierarchy. The Phantom File Project was discontinued, Elena said carefully. What we're offering you is its successor. Same concept, better execution, more clearly defined parameters. Thompson looked confused. What exactly would we be doing? Elena moved to the window and gazed out at the desert landscape. Missions that require plausible deniability. Rescue operations in countries where the United States can't officially operate. Counterterrorism actions against targets that conventional military forces can't touch due to political complications. Intelligence gathering in situations too sensitive for traditional agencies. Assassination? Williams asked quietly. Elena turned back to face them. Sometimes, when targets represent clear and present dangers that can't be neutralized through other means. Always with proper authorization, always as a last resort, always with extensive mission planning to minimize collateral damage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake looked around at his team members, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were being offered something unprecedented, the chance to operate at the highest levels of special operations with resources and authority beyond anything they had experienced. But they were also being asked to step outside the normal military system that had defined their entire careers. No conventional chain of command, no traditional oversight, no guarantee that their actions would be supported if operations went wrong. How long do we have to decide? Jake asked. Your evaluation begins now, Elena replied. You'll have 2 weeks to complete a series of tests designed to measure your capabilities under the kind of conditions you would face in this program. At the end of that period, we'll make our assessment and extend invitations to personnel who meet our standards. She moved toward the door, then paused. I should mention that not everyone who enters this evaluation leaves with their original team intact. The tests are designed to identify individual capabilities, not unit cohesion. It's possible that some of you will be selected while others are not. The statement hit like a physical blow. Jake's team had operated together for 3 years. They had saved each other's lives multiple times and developed the kind of trust that only comes from shared combat experience. What happens to the team if only some of us are selected? Jake asked. Elena's expression softened slightly. Those not selected return to their normal duties with no knowledge of what the selected personnel are doing. It's a clean break professionally and personally. We've found that partial team integration creates security risks and operational complications. After Elena left, Jake's team sat in stunned silence. The magnitude of what they were being offered was slowly becoming clear, along with the potential costs. So we could end up losing the team either way, Rodriguez said finally. Either we all fail and go back to normal ops, or some of us succeed and the rest never see us again. Williams nodded grimly. And we don't even know what the tests involve. As if summoned by their conversation, Elena returned carrying a stack of folders. Your first evaluation begins tonight, she announced. You'll be conducting a reconnaissance mission against a simulated terrorist training facility. The target is located 15 miles from here in mountainous terrain. She handed each team member a folder containing mission details. You have 2 hours to plan, then you'll be transported to an insertion point. The facility is guarded by opposition forces using live ammunition loaded with marking rounds. If you're hit, sensors on your gear will register the impact, and you'll be considered casualties. Jake opened his folder and studied the intelligence provided. The target was a compound built into rocky terrain with multiple buildings, defensive positions, and what appeared to be sophisticated sensor equipment. What's the objective? He asked. Gather intelligence on the facility's layout, defensive capabilities, and personnel numbers without being detected, Elena replied. You have until dawn to complete the mission and reach your extraction point. Thompson looked up from his folder. What happens if we're detected or take casualties? Elena's smile was cold. Then, you fail the evaluation. Questions? There were none. The mission parameters were clear, even if the stakes remained somewhat mysterious. As Elena left them to plan, Jake gathered his team around the central table. All right, let's break this down, he said, spreading out the aerial photographs and terrain maps. What do we see? For the next 2 hours, they analyzed every detail of the target and surrounding terrain. The facility was well-positioned on high ground with clear fields of fire in all directions. Natural approach routes were limited and would require careful movement to avoid detection. Williams identified the most likely locations for sensors and observation posts. Rodriguez plotted potential infiltration routes that would minimize exposure. Jackson and Thompson worked out communications procedures and emergency protocols. Jake coordinated their efforts and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. Despite the unusual circumstances, they fell back on procedures and training that had served them well in real combat operations. The familiarity of mission planning helped offset the strangeness of their situation. As darkness fell, a different driver arrived to transport them to their insertion point. The ride took 30 minutes through increasingly rough terrain until they reached a spot where the vehicle could go no further. Insertion point, the driver announced. Your extraction point is marked on your maps. You have 8 hours. Jake checked his watch as they gathered their gear. 2,200 hours. Dawn would come around 0600, giving them exactly the time limit Elena had specified. They moved out into the desert night, immediately falling into the patrol formations and movement techniques they had perfected over years of operations. The terrain was challenging but not impossible, and the cool night air made for good conditions despite the physical exertion required. It took them 3 hours to reach the target area, moving carefully to avoid detection by whatever sensor systems might be deployed around the facility. As they established an observation post on high ground overlooking the compound, Jake began to understand why this mission had been chosen for their evaluation. The facility was more sophisticated than the intelligence photos had suggested. Multiple guard towers with overlapping fields of fire, roving patrols following unpredictable patterns, and sensor equipment that appeared to be military-grade rather than commercial. This isn't a simulated terrorist facility, Williams whispered. This is a professional training setup. Jake nodded. They were being tested against opposition forces that knew what they were doing. The kind of adversaries they might face in real operations under this mysterious program Elena represented. For the next 4 hours, they conducted the most thorough reconnaissance of their careers. They mapped patrol patterns, identified defensive positions, counted personnel, and documented equipment types and locations. Rodriguez managed to get close enough to photograph several key areas, while Thompson intercepted radio communications that revealed additional details about the facility's operations. As dawn approached, They withdrew to their extraction point, having completed their mission without detection. The sense of professional satisfaction was mixed with awareness that this had been only the first test. The driver who picked them up wore a slight smile as they loaded into the vehicle. "Nice work," he commented, the first words any of their handlers had spoken beyond basic instructions. Back at the compound, Elena was waiting with their debrief. She reviewed their intelligence gathering with obvious approval, asking detailed questions about their observations and methodology. "Excellent work," she concluded. "You've passed the first evaluation. How many more tests are there?" Jake asked. Elena consulted a clipboard. "That depends on how well you continue to perform. Some candidates require more evaluation than others." As his team settled in for some much-needed rest, Jake reflected on what they had accomplished. The mission had been challenging, but within their capabilities. The real test would be whether they could maintain their performance standards as the evaluations became more complex and demanding. He had the feeling that their reconnaissance mission had been the easiest challenge they would face. The second week of evaluations pushed Jake's team beyond anything they had experienced in conventional special operations. Each test seemed designed to strip away another layer of military doctrine and force them to operate on pure instinct and improvisation. On Monday, they were given a hostage rescue scenario where the hostages turn out to be the actual terrorists, requiring them to completely reverse their tactical approach mid-mission. Tuesday brought a counterintelligence exercise where they had to identify and neutralize a double agent within their own support team. Wednesday's test involved infiltrating a mock embassy and extracting sensitive documents while avoiding both security forces and rival intelligence operatives. Each evaluation was more complex than the last, requiring them to make decisions that conventional military training hadn't prepared them for. They succeeded through a combination of individual skill, team cohesion, and willingness to adapt when standard procedures proved inadequate. But it was Thursday's test that revealed the true nature of what they were being recruited for. Elena briefed them on what appeared to be a straightforward mission: infiltrate a warehouse facility and gather intelligence on weapons trafficking operations. The target was located in an industrial area about 50 miles from their compound, and they would be operating against what they were told was a criminal organization with military-style security. The mission began normally. They conducted surveillance, planned their approach, and infiltrated the facility without detection. But as they began gathering intelligence, Jake realized they weren't looking at a simulation or training exercise. The weapons in the warehouse were real. Military-grade assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and sophisticated explosives that could level city blocks. The documentation they photographed showed actual shipping manifests, bank account numbers, and contact information for dealers across 3 continents. Most disturbing were the photographs they found showing the aftermath of terrorist attacks where these weapons had been used. Real attacks, real casualties, real consequences of the trafficking operation they were investigating. "This isn't a test," Rodriguez whispered as they photographed a shipping container filled with surface-to-air missiles. "This is a real operation." Jake felt his world shift as the implications became clear. They weren't being evaluated anymore. They were conducting an actual mission against an active weapons trafficking network. Everything they had been told about simulations and training exercises had been a carefully constructed cover story. As they completed their intelligence gathering and prepared to withdraw, Jake made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Instead of simply leaving with the information they had collected, he ordered his team to plan explosives that would destroy the entire weapons cache. It was a violation of their mission parameters, but Jake knew that leaving those weapons in place would result in innocent deaths around the world. His team didn't question the order. They had seen enough to understand the stakes. The explosion lit up the night sky as they reached their extraction point. Millions of dollars worth of illegal weapons disappeared in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Elena was waiting for them with an expression Jake couldn't read. "You weren't supposed to destroy the warehouse," she said as they climbed out of their transport vehicle. "Those were real weapons heading to real terrorists, Jake replied without apology. We weren't going to leave them in place. Elena studied his face for a long moment. How did you know? The documentation was too detailed for a simulation. The weapons were too sophisticated for a training exercise. And the photographs of attack casualties were too recent for anything except an active investigation. Elena nodded slowly. You passed a real test. Which was? Whether you would follow orders or do what was right when the two came into conflict, Elena explained. We needed to know if you were operators who could think independently and act on your own moral compass when normal command structure wasn't available to guide your decisions. Jake felt a mixture of relief and anger. So the entire evaluation was designed to put us in a position where we had to violate orders. Not violate, Elena corrected. Transcend. The kind of operations you'll be conducting don't always fit into neat mission parameters. Sometimes you'll have to make decisions that go beyond what you're specifically authorized to do. We needed to know you were capable of that kind of independent judgment. William stepped forward. What happens now? Elena gestured for them to follow her to a building they hadn't been allowed to enter during their stay at the compound. Inside, they found a sophisticated briefing room with communications equipment, computer terminals, and wall displays showing global intelligence data. Now you learn what you're really being recruited for, Elena said, activating a large screen that displayed a world map marked with dozens of red indicators. Each of these markers represents an active threat to United States national security that conventional military forces or intelligence agencies cannot address through normal channels, she explained. Terrorist cells in countries where we're not officially operating. Weapons trafficking networks that cross multiple international borders. Hostage situations involving American citizens in regions where military rescue operations would create diplomatic disasters. She highlighted several specific markers as she continued. 3 Americans being held by drug cartels in Colombia. A terrorist training facility in Somalia that's preparing attacks against U.S. interests. A nuclear materials trafficking ring operating between Pakistan and Iran. All situations where conventional military action is impossible, but where failure to act will result in American deaths. Jake studied the display, beginning to understand the scope of what they were being offered. And we would handle these situations. You will be part of teams that handle them, Elena confirmed. Small, highly trained units with the resources and authority to operate outside normal diplomatic and military constraints. You would have access to intelligence that isn't shared with conventional forces. You would have support capabilities that don't officially exist. And you would have legal protections that cover actions taken in service of national security. Thompson looked uncertain. Legal protections? Elena's expression became more serious. What I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that require special authorization even to discuss. The program you're being recruited for operates under presidential findings that authorize specific actions in support of national security. Every mission you conduct would be approved by a committee that includes the National Security Advisor, the Director of Central Intelligence, and representatives from the Defense Department. She moved to another display that showed organizational charts and authorization procedures. You would not be operating as rogue agents or mercenaries. Every action you take would be authorized by the highest levels of government, but those authorizations would never appear in public records. Rodriguez raised his hand. What about accountability? What happens if operations go wrong? You would have the same legal protections as any other military personnel acting under lawful orders, Elena replied. The difference is that your orders would come through channels that don't officially exist. If you're captured or killed, your families would be told you died in training accidents or conventional operations. There would be no public acknowledgement of what you were actually doing. The room fell silent as the full implications of what they were being offered became clear. They were being asked to become operators who existed in the shadows of official government policy, conducting missions that served national interests but could never be publicly acknowledged. How many people are in this program? Jake asked. Currently, about 60 operators organized into teams of 4 to 8 personnel, Elena answered. All recruited from Special Operations Forces, all with proven track records of exceptional performance under difficult conditions. Williams leaned forward. "What's your role in all this?" Elena smiled slightly. "I'm the operational commander for the Western Hemisphere. I coordinate missions, assign teams, and ensure that operations are conducted according to approved parameters. I report to a director who reports to people whose names you would recognize, but who can never officially acknowledge this program exists." Jake felt pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "You've been watching us for months because you needed new personnel for your teams. We lost a 4-man team in Syria 6 months ago," Elena confirmed quietly. "They were conducting a mission to eliminate a terrorist leader who was planning attacks against American embassies. The operation succeeded, but we lost all 4 operators in the extraction." The weight of what they were being offered settled over Jake like a physical presence. Real missions with real consequences, conducted at the highest levels of national security, but with no official recognition or acknowledgement. "What happens if we say no?" Thompson asked. "You return to your normal duties with enhanced security clearances that prevent you from discussing anything you've experienced here," Elena replied. "Your careers continue as they would have otherwise, and you serve your country in conventional special operations roles." "And if we say yes?" Elena's expression became intense. "You become part of something bigger than anything you've experienced in conventional military service. You get resources and support that exceed what's available to any other special operations personnel. You conduct missions that directly impact national security at the highest levels." She paused, making sure she had their complete attention. "But you also accept that your actions will never be publicly acknowledged. You accept that you may be required to operate in morally ambiguous situations where there are no perfect solutions. And you accept that failure could result in consequences that extend far beyond your own lives." Jake looked around at his team members, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were being offered the ultimate expression of their professional capabilities, but at cost they were only beginning to understand. "How long do we have to decide?" he asked. 24 hours, Elena replied. "Tomorrow evening, you'll give me your individual decisions. Those who accept will begin advanced training immediately. Those who decline will be transported back to Coronado with no further contact from this program." As Elena left them to consider their options, Jake's team gathered around the central table in their barracks for what might be their final conversation as a unit. "This is what we always said we wanted," Rodriguez said quietly. "Missions that really matter. Resources to do the job right. Authority to make decisions without political interference. But it means giving up everything else," Jackson replied. "Official recognition, normal military careers, probably any chance at a conventional life after service." Williams was studying the floor, lost in thought. "I keep thinking about those weapons in the warehouse. How many people would have died if we hadn't destroyed them? How many times have we completed conventional missions knowing that political limitations kept us from really solving the problem?" Thompson nodded. "My girlfriend keeps asking why I can't tell her about what we do on missions. If I take this job, I'll never be able to tell her anything about what I really do." Jake understood their dilemma because he faced the same choice. Everything about this program appealed to his professional instincts. The chance to conduct missions without political interference, to have resources adequate to the task, to operate at levels where his team's capabilities could make a real difference. But accepting would mean stepping outside the military system that had defined his entire adult life. No conventional chain of command, no official recognition, no guarantee that their sacrifices would ever be acknowledged. "Whatever we decide," Jake said finally, "we decide as individuals. This program breaks up teams, and we have to accept that some of us might choose differently than others." They spent the night discussing their options, sharing concerns and fears they normally wouldn't voice. By morning, Jake knew his decision, though he wasn't sure about the others. Elena returned the next evening to collect their answers. She met with each team member individually, starting with Thompson and working her way up to Jake. When she finally sat down with him, Elena's expression was unreadable. "What's your decision, Commander?" she asked. Jake had rehearsed his answer, but When the moment came, he spoke from instinct rather than preparation. "I accept," he said simply. "My team has always been about doing what needs to be done, regardless of whether it follows conventional procedures. This program is the logical extension of that philosophy." Elena nodded. "And your team?" "Rodriguez and Williams accepted," she replied. "Thompson and Jackson declined." Jake felt a stab of loss. His team was being broken up, just as Elena had warned. Two of his best operators were walking away from an opportunity they would never get again, while two others were moving forward into something they couldn't yet fully understand. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Elena stood up. "You and Rodriguez and Williams begin advanced training tomorrow. You'll be joined by a new fourth team member, an operator from Delta Force who's been in the program for 2 years. Thompson and Jackson will be transported back to Coronado tonight." As Elena left, Jake realized that his old life was ending and something entirely new was beginning. He would never again be a conventional SEAL operating under normal military parameters. From now on, he would be something else entirely, a ghost operator conducting missions that serve national security interests in ways that could never be officially acknowledged. The transformation was complete. The evaluation had been passed, the decision had been made, and Jake Morrison was about to discover what it really meant to operate in the shadows of American foreign policy. 3 months later, Jake led his new team on their first operational mission, rescuing 2 American journalists being held by terrorists in a region where conventional military action was impossible. The operation succeeded perfectly, the hostages were recovered safely, and the terrorist cell was eliminated. The mission never appeared in any official records. The rescued journalists were told their freedom resulted from diplomatic negotiations, and Jake's team returned to their classified base with no public recognition of their actions. But Jake knew they had prevented 2 American deaths and disrupted a terrorist network that had been planning attacks against civilian targets. They had operated with resources and authority that exceeded anything available to conventional special operations forces, and they had succeeded where normal military action would have failed. As Elena had promised, they were making a difference in ways they had never imagined possible in conventional service. The woman with no identity, no file, and no background had been right about everything. She commanded respect because she had earned it through operations that saved lives and protected national interests in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged. Jake finally understood why his team had saluted her instantly on that foggy morning at Coronado. Some authority doesn't need official recognition because it's built on something more powerful than rank or position. It's built on proven capability to do what needs to be done, regardless of whether anyone will ever know about it.